have to tell you that the greatest victory against censorship in this rather surreal journey of mine has come far closer to home. My mother. My mother never instructed me not to write the book, probably because she knew that request would go nowhere. But she did ask me not to anger God. And I respectfully reminded her that angering some mullahs and imams and Muslim political lobbyists does not necessarily mean angering God. I don't think she bought that argument, but she did steel her spine for the time that I was writing the book. And 2 weeks after the book came out, my mother went to the mosque for the first time since its release. She fully anticipated criticism. She got it. Knowing she was in the congregation that night, the presiding cleric gave a khutbah, a sermon, in which he announced Irshad Manji to be a bigger criminal than Osama bin Laden. After all, he said, her book has created more debate among Muslims worldwide and therefore more division than even Al-Qaeda's terrorism has. A damning indictment, and not of me. My mother, being a survivor in so many ways, blinked back her tears, but stayed put through the entire sermon. And afterwards, various members of her congregation, women on the women's side of the mosque, men in the parking lot, approached her to say, "Don't you worry. What Irshad is writing absolutely needs to be expressed." Well, my mom called me that night upon returning home to say this is what she heard and this is what she needed to hear in order to be convinced that I'm not a self-hating Muslim, that this is not some act of revenge, some vendetta against the madrasa experience, and that what I'm doing with the right and pure intention of seeking to reclaim God's good name. I'm only sorry that she needed social approval in order to see that. But look, she's a mom, and she worries for her reputation as a parent as much as she worries about the safety of her children. Well, 2 more weeks later, as I embarked on my book tour, I dropped in on Mom, and she, in turn, slipped a card into my suitcase. Unbeknownst to me, I found it when I was unpacking. The card reads, "Bravo." And inside, my mother wrote, among other things, "I am so proud of your achievements. You go, girl." And I have to say, I need to just let you know, I don't carry this card around with me for validation. There are far easier ways to get validated than to write a book like this, all right? I carry this card around as a reminder that even a traditional, devout, 5 times a day on your rug to pray Muslim, as my mother is, can nonetheless be open to challenge, debate, and critical thinking. That's why there's hope. But I'm a journalist, first and foremost, and I deal in the world of reality checks. So let us never lose sight of the fact that whenever you ask questions, you will always ruffle the feathers of your own and not just of the usual suspects who are there to oppose you. The fact is, for all the indicators of momentum I've just given you, there are many, many more Muslims who don't want to see people like me succeed in restoring humanity and reason to Islam. Not because they're bad people and not because I'm a bad person, but because they fear losing their faith. But you know what they really fear losing? Their dogma. The best accusation I ever received, and now you know I've gotten a lot of them, the best one came from an angry Muslim guy who, by the way, described himself as a moderate. He wrote to me to say, Irshad Manji, you lie so much about Islam that even your hair rises up in protest. I wish all my detractors had such a great sense of humor, even when it's unwitting. But he then made the mistake of writing to me a second time. This time to say that I'm a prostitute, a whore, for standing in front of audiences and speaking my mind freely without being fully covered. At which point, I wrote back to him to say, brother, you realize with that first hair-raising email you sent me, you've given me more material for my speeches. And if giving those speeches makes me a prostitute, here's a question. You know it. Doesn't giving me material for them make you my pimp? I thought it was a reasonable question. Never heard back from him. And I actually regret that because I thought this would be the start of a wonderful dialogue, a clarifying one at the very least. The point is that censorship that we impose on ourselves is far more insidious than censorship imposed from without. Because, of course, the thing most of us fear most is upsetting those who are supposed to be our allies, our friends, and our family. And don't take it from me that this is part of social change. Take it from the likes of Gandhi, who didn't just stand up to British imperialism, he stood up to imperialism within Indian society. He made the point clearly that replacing a white oligarchy with a brown oligarchy is no victory at all because it is still an oligarchy. He denounced gender apartheid. He condemned the domination of the so-called untouchables. And he excoriated the 2,000-plus year caste system. Didn't make him too popular within his own Indian society. But he did it because that's part of the path to justice. Take it from Martin Luther King Jr., who took it on the chin from members of the black church. They accused him of creating needless tension. And rather than run away from that accusation, or beg for forgiveness, or dilute his integrity for the sake of popularity, Reverend King confronted that accusation. And in his now famous letter from a Birmingham jail, he wrote, I must confess I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension that is necessary for growth. And he wasn't just talking about the growth of American society in general, he was talking about the growth of African Americans in particular. In other words, his challenge to them was not an act of betrayal, but an act of faith in their capacity to do better and to be better than most of their ministers gave them credit for.